Hello, I apologize for not being at school today. We're going to use the video to introduce TP-CASTT as a process for analyzing poetry. We're going to start with A Man, which is a poem you have. Now, before you even read the poem, the first step of TP-CASTT is to examine the title and give your first impressions and your predictions for the title. So I'm looking at the title, and it is A Man. And I have some predictions that go along with that. The first thing I notice is that it says a man and not a woman. So I'm wondering if he is male, if that's a requirement, that the person be male. I also am looking at a man, and they said a man and not the man, which makes me think there's only one. And a is very generic compared to the man. And so I'm going to put that down as well as a prediction. I'm also thinking about man could be mankind. That might be an interpretation of a man. Or it might be human, would be another interpretation for a man. And so it could have to do with being human. It could also be what it means to be a man. And so that might be what the poem is about. So I have some ideas for what the poem might be about. I also make some predictions that, maybe this man is going to encounter a problem. Maybe he is going to have an adventure. But it's very generic and general. And so that's my first impression of the title, and I've made a few notes about what I think about the title at this point. I'll let you catch up, and then we can go on. The next step in TP-CASTT is P or paraphrase. And paraphrase is to not quite summarize, but to restate what's going on in the poem, just the action. It's very superficial. You're just keeping it at the surface level, making sure you understand the action of the poem. And so we're going to read through the poem, and then we're going to paraphrase. So the poem says, A man. While fighting for his country, he lost an arm and was suddenly afraid. From now on, I shall only be able to do things by halves. I shall reap half a harvest. I shall be able to play either the tune or the accompaniment on the piano, but never both parts together. I shall be able to bang with only one fist on doors. And worst of all, I shall only be able to half hold my love close to me. There will be things I cannot do at all. Applaud, for example, at shows where everyone applauds. From that moment on, he set himself to do everything with twice as much enthusiasm. And where the arm had been torn away, a wing grew. And so now I want to paraphrase and make sure I understand the action of the poem. And so here's my first thought. While fighting for his country, he lost an arm. Well, that's pretty straightforward. We have that he was soldier and he was wounded. Okay. And was suddenly afraid. He was afraid. From now on, I shall be able to only do things by halves. Can only do by halves. I shall reap half a harvest. I shall be able to play either the tune or the accompaniment on the piano, never both parts together. I shall be able to bang with only one fist on doors. And worst of all, I shall only be able to half hold my love close to me. So all of this right here is about things he can only do half of. Okay. There will be things I cannot do at all. Applaud, for example, at shows where everyone applauds. So this piece is cannot applaud at all. From that moment on, he set himself to do everything with twice as much enthusiasm. So all we're saying here is he changed his attitude. And where the arm had been torn away, a wing grew. So where arm was gone, a wing grew. We're not going to try to make sense of that just yet. All we're doing at the P part is the paraphrase, and so we just want the facts, we just want the gist of what's going on in the poem. The next step in TP-CASTT is C for connotation. This is where we start looking at word choice. One of the first things I notice when I read this poem, while fighting for his country, he lost an arm. This word is lost up here, but down here they say his arm had been torn away. And so they've changed the term that they're using, and I want to think about why they would change that term. The idea of a lost arm is it's like oops, right? If you lose an arm, it went disappeared, like keys or something. There's no one to blame. It just happened, and there's no blame there. You lose your keys, you lose your phone, but you generally don't lose an arm. And so the fact that your writer chose to say lost an arm is important. He was suddenly afraid, and he says, from now on, I shall only be able to do things by halves. Well, we get this idea of halves, where he's only like half a man. He can only do half of what he thinks he should do. Well, let's see what he thinks he shall do. I shall reap half a harvest. Well, are we saying that he's a farmer? Like reap and a harvest? That's what a farmer does. That's to bring in the crops. But we've already said he's a soldier. And if we're going to say he's a farmer here, then we've got to be ready to say he's a piano player and all these other things. And I don't think we can say that. This must be more symbolic than that. And so when we think of connotation, we're thinking of what could this possibly be referring to. And when we think about a harvest, we're talking about food. And so this is about providing for his needs. We all have basic needs, like food and shelter. And I shall reap half a harvest is talking about that basic need of food. The next line says, I shall be able to play either the tune or the accompaniment on the piano. Well, there's got to be more to it than just about playing the piano. He's not a piano player by trade, and so there's got to be more to it. Well, if I shall reap half a harvest is about your needs, this whole idea of playing on a piano or music is what this becomes symbolic for, and it's about the things that make life enjoyable, that make life worth living. I'm going to say it adds value to life. I shall be able to bang with only one fist on doors. Well, he chose the word bang. And I'm trying to think about when you would bang on a door. And you would bang on a door when maybe you are angry, or maybe you are worried, or in a hurry. And all of these things have to do with emotions. And so this is really less about banging on a door and more about being able to express emotion. And worst of all, I shall be able to half hold my love close to me. And so again, we're talking about emotion, being able to show love. A little heart there. There will be things I cannot do at all. Applaud, for example, where everyone applauds. So the idea of applauding must be important because they've mentioned that idea twice. And if we applaud, we show appreciation. And if everyone else is applauding, then he must be left out. He is isolated. I'll let you catch up, and then we can go to the next section where we'll look at that second stanza. Okay, now we're ready to look at this last stanza, and we're working on the connotations that go along with this last stanza. It says, from that moment on, he set himself to do everything with twice as much enthusiasm. Well, that's pretty straightforward. I don't think we have a whole lot of issue with that. But we've got to figure out from what moment. Well, I think that moment must be talking about this when he made a change in attitude, or changed his attitude. And where an arm had been torn away, remember we talked about how up at the top they said lost? Well, now they're changing it to his arm's been torn away, which is much more violent, much more aggressive, very unwanted, right? This is a very negative term, where lost is nobody's fault, torn is very violent, somebody did something. And then they want to talk about the wing grew. Well, let's talk about a wing and what a wing might actually be, because we don't really think he grew a wing. That would be just bizarre. This has to be symbolic, because we know poetry is much more symbolic than literal. And so when we think about wings, we think about birds. Uh-oh. We think about birds. We think about planes, maybe angels. But we don't think he died, because it doesn't talk about him dying. It's not that negative. It's very positive that where a arm had been torn away, a wing grew. And so we're thinking about these things. All of these things fly. And we're not thinking that he literally flies, but we're thinking, maybe he flies symbolically or metaphorically. Maybe he is able to do more. Maybe his attitude and ability soar. And that's what we mean by flying, and that's how his wing grew, that it's less about a literal wing and more about a metaphorical wing. All right, we're ready for the next step on TP-CASTT, which is attitude. And attitude is about how the writer feels about his subject. And so when we talk about attitude, in this case, we're talking about the way that your speaker feels about the man and about the way the man has handled this. And so what we see in here is we see respect for the man and the way the man has handled it. Then we start looking at shift. And shift has to do with where either attitude changes or speaker changes or maybe point of view changes, but there is some sort of change that occurs. And in this poem, that change occurs between the first and second stanzas, right down here. Because before that, we get all this pity party. And after that, we get enthusiasm. And so we can very easily see the change in the man's attitude. Now, the writer's attitude doesn't really change. The poet's attitude doesn't change. But the man that we're talking about, his attitude definitely changes between the first stanza and the second stanza. And so that we are going to label shift, and we'll say above that, he's having a little bit of self-pity. And after that, he's got enthusiasm. Life is much better. All right, so we've done T, P, C, A, S. Now we're ready for the next to the last T. And that asks us to revisit the title. And so we are going to revisit the title again. And when we revisit the title, we're going to find that now our understanding of a man is different. Now we see that a man really has to do with this man, so a particular man, and a change that he went through. How he started off with this self-pity, and how he learned to live life better despite his circumstances. Okay. And so now we're ready to begin to think about theme. And when we think about theme, we have to consider how this would apply to all of us. And we're not likely to experience the loss of an arm in battle, or if we do, it won't be all of us that do. And so we want to think about what this might have to do with all of us and how this might apply to all of us. And so when we think about this, move this up a little bit. When we start thinking about theme now, we want to think about all people. And so now we're talking about mankind in general. And we're talking about us and what we have learned. And so based on this, we can learn that when faced with struggles and difficulties, it is your attitude that makes the difference. In your circumstances. Hopefully you have found TP-CASTT easy and accessible to use, and you will enjoy using this and find it helpful with poetry. I'll be back on Wednesday, and we'll be talking about the poem that's on the back side of this, which is "O Captain, My Captain." Don't lose this paper. Bring it back to class tomorrow.